Hello, thank you for joining me for chapter 26 through 30 of Rump, the true story of Stiltkin. This is a lot to listen to, and I decided to not add pictures to the video. And so because of that, you'll be able to just listen to it in the background while you're playing in your room or coloring or eating your lunch, whatever you decide to do this weekend, okay? Chapter 27 is called The Miller and the Merchant. It is a very strange feeling to have your brain doing one thing and your body doing something completely different. It was like my mind was attached to some bizarre creature and it was carrying me away captive. Soon Frederick and Bruno caught up with me, and for the rest of our journey they led me by a rope like a cow, but I hardly noticed. Rumple is tighter than any real rope. It can't be cut or loosened. My legs would have carried me over the bridge and up the hill and to the walls of the castle. They probably would have carried me right through walls and through fire and spears to get to Opal. So powerless was I against this magic. But with Frederick and Bruno, it was all too easy. When we reached the castle, the guards saluted them and opened the gates for us. We crossed the grounds, entered the castle doors, now gilded gold, marched up a grand golden staircase and down a long corridor to a large golden door with gold handles. Frederick knocked, and we went in. The room was smaller than I expected. In the center stood a cradle, covered in white satin and embroidered with gold thread. Opal hovered over the cradle. She looked very different from the last time I saw her. Her eyes were no longer blank, but sunken with exhaustion. She was pale and thin, and her golden hair was loose and disheveled. I guess being a queen and a mother makes you worried and tired, not to mention the added worry of your baby being taken away. The cradle began to wail, and Opal reached inside to pick up her baby and hold him close to her chest. She shook, and her eyes brimmed with tears as she saw me watching. "Please!" I opened my mouth to say that I didn't want her baby. I just wanted to get away and never make another promise as long as I lived. But I couldn't. My tongue swelled in my mouth. I couldn't say anything against the bargain. "Well, well, well," said another voice beside me. "Our little man has returned to make good on your promise." It was Oswald, the miller, fatter than ever, his girth covered in red velvet trimmed with gold threads. He looked like a giant tomato ready to burst. "Now, daughter, give the little man what you promised," he said, his voice so oily it slithered. Opal clenched her jaw and stiffened, clearly trying to fight her father's command, but something prevented her. The magic, the same magic that commanded me. She was fighting just like I was against the invisible ropes that pulled me toward the baby. When I had spun her the gold, Opal had laughed at the idea of giving me her firstborn child. She hadn't taken the promise seriously. Or perhaps she hadn't considered what it meant to be a mother, how she would love her child. She had thought it was a good joke. I'd never imagined she would make such a foolish promise. We had both been fools. I didn't want her baby, and she didn't want to give it to me. What was the point of a bargain neither person wanted to keep? But the magic was closing in on both of us. We had no choice now. "I knew you would go to her," said the miller, "after the king took her away. I didn't worry because I knew you would spin the gold and Opal could give you anything in return, anything, and the gold would be hers." He laughed and his whole body jiggled. "Oh, but her unborn child! Her unborn child! Well, I suppose this will teach her not to make such rash promises. Now, daughter, give him what you promised. Give him the child." I unwillingly took a step forward, and Opal shook as she tried to back away from me, but she couldn't. We were just a few steps apart. Opal clutched her infant tighter still. "Don't come near me, or I'll scream. I'll scream, and they'll break down the door, and you'll be dragged into the dungeon, or put in the stocks, or hanged." The miller laughed. "Don't talk nonsense, silly girl. What would the king say were he to learn that you never really spun the gold, but bargained his child to this creature, this little demon? Demon? I'd been called many things, but demon? That felt a bit harsh. You've already fallen out of favor with him, Oswald continued. But give over the child and we can make things right. He will be forgiving of your carelessness. If he has the gold, he'd rather have the gold than a child. Would he? Really? People often said that the king loved gold more than anything, but certainly not more than his own son, his heir. No, he wouldn't. He loves our son, Opal protested. It doesn't matter, said the miller. You made a promise. He spun you the gold. The child is his. I saw then that the miller understood the magic. It was like he could see the invisible ropes pulling at me. He knew, perhaps, he had known all along, that I had to take the baby, that I had no control. But there was something else in his eyes, a malicious pleasure, as if he were enjoying the suffering. And it was only the beginning. He wanted me to take the baby so he could inflict more pain. The miller clasped his hands over his belly. Now, let's get on with it, shall we? We have much more interesting things to discuss than babies. The invisible ropes pulled tighter, and this time Opal was the one who stepped forward. If I reached my arms out, I would be able to touch the baby. Opal was trembling. I'll give you all the riches in the kingdom, anything you want. Just please don't take my baby. The miller scoffed. He gave you all the riches you have. I hated to admit it, but he had a point. And you shall have plenty more children when we are through. Only take care not to bargain them away. The miller's voice turned harsh and cold. Give him the child, girl. Please. Opal broke down and cried, each breath coming out in racking sobs. I was filled with pity for her. I fought as hard as I could against my next step. I thought of my own mother, holding me close as she whispered my name in my ear. Had she meant to bestow such a mean fate upon me? Did she want me to be tangled in all this magic, all because of a name? A name is supposed to be your destiny. It's supposed to give you power, but I was utterly powerless. My name told me I was, and I didn't see how I could change that. Opal was before me now, kneeling and holding her baby to me. He was fast asleep, a tiny creature. Luckily, he looked nothing like his father. What is his name? I asked. Archie, she whispered. Archibald Bartholomew Oswald. And she sobbed more after saying the last two names. I couldn't blame her. I took the baby from her arms, and Opal slumped to the ground, wetting the wood planks with her tears. Here I held the future king in my arms. He started to squirm and make noise. What was I supposed to do when it made noise? Good, said the miller. Now that bargains have been kept and promises fulfilled, I think it best that we move on. Yes, little demon, we have business to discuss. The miller's eyes were now overflowing with an insatiable greed. I looked away in disgust, and suddenly I realized why the room felt so small. Straw. Walls of straw, mountains of straw. It towered on both sides of the room, covering all the walls to the ceiling. There was only a narrow space from the door to the center of the room where the cradle lay, and then a small clearing behind that for the window. To my right, the straw was cleared for the fireplace. In front of the fireplace was a spinning wheel. A chill ran down my spine, and I shivered. No, I said. Never again. Oh, come, said Oswald. I think you rather enjoy making the gold. Gives you a feeling of power, usefulness. Your mother felt the same. He grinned wickedly. My mother? But she... Oh, yes, he said. I knew of her gift. I met her long before she came to the mountain. I believe I was the first to benefit from her skill, as I shall be the last. How delighted I was to learn that these things can be passed on. My insides went cold. The floor tilted beneath me. You're the merchant, I said. You're the one who made her spin all that straw into gold.
No, I never made her. I believe she was rather enthusiastic, and we always struck a bargain. It was always a fair trade. Straw isn't worth all that much, you know. I was rather generous, really." He rubbed his immense belly. "But then she ran away to that blasted mountain. Thought she could hide there in all the gold, but I caught up with her, and a good thing too, provident even. The miller had just died with no sons to carry on his work. I was wealthy enough to buy the mill, and I think your mother was glad in the end. I dare say you're alive because I kept her so well fed after your father died. And aren't you grateful? You probably wouldn't have been born had I not bargained with her, the poor soul. It's a pity she died." He gave out a long, exaggerated sigh. "But I did hope that her son might show a bit of the same promise, so I waited. I was patient, and you did not disappoint. Frederick and Bruno were charged to keep an eye on you, and how delighted I was when my sons came and told me the outlandish story that you had a pile of gold in your cottage. It was all too easy to get you to come begging, and then you became quite greedy, wanted more food than anyone else. You didn't even share. Shameful! And then we had the blunder with the king. Yes, he's a bit more attentive than his predecessor when it comes to the gold being traded in his kingdom. I should have known. Ah, well, things turned out better than I had hoped, what with you spinning for Opal, and now she is the queen." Opal remained curled on the ground, sobbing. "But we are not through, you see, little demon. Though Opal is the queen and I am lord of the mountain, the king is not pleased with her lack of performance these past months. Of course, we have made our excuses with her delicate condition, but that is all past now, and so it has become necessary that we please our king, and perhaps ourselves a little more." He chuckled, running his hands over the straw. I hated him. Rage gathered in my stomach, burned in my chest, making my head throb. He was the demon. He was the reason for my mother's sorrow, her entrapment, and her death. All my troubles had begun with the miller. "I'm not spinning any more gold," I said. "Really?" said the miller, amused. The baby began to cry in my arms, and Opal wailed too. "I think I've got all I can handle, thanks." I backed away. He could hold me here forever, but there was nothing he could offer me that would make me spin a single straw into gold. Nothing. "But you haven't heard what I have to offer," he said, grinning wickedly. A chill ran down my spine. I just knew it was going to be something awful. "I don't want anything. I'm not spinning." I started to back away with the baby in my arms. Better to stop here. Just take the baby and leave. But Frederick and Bruno grabbed my arms on either side and held fast. "Oh, I think you'll reconsider in a moment," said the miller. "It's such a good bargain. For your gold I shall give you." He reached behind a sack of straw, and the whole pile shook as though an animal was struggling to get out. "I shall give you your friend unharmed." The miller pulled a girl from out of the straw, bound and gagged. One of her eyes was black and swollen, but the other was wide, burning with a fierce and savage rage. Red. That's the end of chapter 27. And we've been reading for quite a while now. It's been half an hour. So if you want to go ahead and take another break, you can pause the video and go work some more on your schoolwork. And when you come back, it'll be at about 27 minutes, and we'll read chapter 28, which is called Grasping at Straws. Red fought against her bindings and gave a muffled scream beneath the gag until she was purple. The miller laughed. "She is a feisty one, I'll say, rather impolite. It took both Frederick and Bruno to catch her. They told me she was your only friend in the world, and, well, I suppose if you have only one friend, you might want to keep her. In one piece, that is." Frederick and Bruno laughed, and Red flailed and struggled against the ropes. Frederick and Bruno stopped laughing and stepped back. Even though she was bound, Red was like a mad beast that might break free at any moment. "Boys," said the miller, "set our little friend in the corner. Then go find a place to wash. You smell like swine."
Frederick and Bruno shoved Red into the corner by the fireplace and then left.
"Now," said the miller, turning to me, "do we have a bargain?"
Red made a muffled growl and shook her head behind Oswald. What did she think I should do? I couldn't let her get hurt. The baby in my arms had been squirming and whimpering all this while, but suddenly he exploded in shrill wails. He sounded like a whole swarm of mad pixies. "He's hungry, let me have him!" cried Opal, rushing toward me, but the miller stopped her.
"Not until he starts spinning."
Spinning, spinning, spinning. Red and gold and opal and the baby. I couldn't think with all the wailing. I would have to think while I spun. "Take him and feed him," I shouted to Opal, and sat down at the spinning wheel. My hands shook as I picked up the straw. The spinning wheel vibrated when I put my foot on the treadle, like it knew something bad was happening. This was the sort of magic Hadel had warned me about. It was wrong, twisted. I pushed the straw through the wheel and began to spin.
"Very wise," said Oswald. "Now the king grows impatient. He is eager for his queen to display her talents once again. And as you can see, he's gathered straw all this time just for her to spin. You have 3 days.
3 days? I asked. I can't finish this in 3 days.
In 3 days the king will return with his hunting party, said the miller. We have promised him results. Therefore, you will promise to make the gold. 3 days. Fail me, and the bargain is off.
He smiled malevolently at Red. She glared at him. Anger welled up in me, stronger than I had ever felt before. I wanted to punch him in his big red belly, and make him explode. And then the anger faded into despair. I was back where I started. 3 days would not be the end. I would never stop spinning the straw into gold. Gran had tried to keep me from all this, from the miller and his greed, from my own stupidity, but maybe there was nothing either of us could have done. The miller stepped forward with a length of rope and bound my legs and ankles to the spinning wheel.
We wouldn't want you to get lost, he said.
No, I couldn't be lost. My name was Rumple. I was trapped. 1 spool of gold. Red was sitting on the floor. She was dirtier than I'd ever seen her. She had scratches and cuts, and the dirt on her face was streaked as though she had been crying. Red, crying. Strong, fierce, fearless Red, crying. I hated to imagine. 2 spools of gold. Opal sat in the pile of straw feeding her baby. She was crying too. When she finished, the miller made her put Archie in the basket next to me and told her to back away, to remind us both that he was mine, some grandfather. 3 spools of gold. 4. The miller gathered the gold as I spun it, draping it around his neck and waist and laughing all the while. Finally, after he was more tangled in gold than Red was in the ropes, he slumped down and his head began to nod. I was feeling hopeful. If he fell asleep, I could untie Red and we could make a run for it. But then I remembered Archie. Even if I could free myself, I would have to take the baby and Opal would probably start shrieking and that would be that. But I wanted to at least talk to Red. Opal, I said after the miller started snoring. Ungag Red! Opal looked at me as if I had insulted her. I tried to sound more submissive and pleading. Your Highness, please, take off Red's gag. No, she said sharply. I'm the queen, and you don't give me orders. She's a mean creature. She always pulled my hair when I was a girl. Evil, that's what she is. Red is evil. Red gave Opal a look that could certainly be called evil, and Opal cowered and then lashed out at me. And so are you, you little demon baby stealer. She began to wail again. Oh, make it stop. I couldn't think. I needed Red's brains right now. Mine were just too scrambled. Opal, your majesty, if you let her speak to me, I may be able to tell you a way that we can solve this problem so you can keep your baby. It was a hollow promise, but I knew it would work for now. Opal stopped crying and her eyes widened. My baby? You'll give him back? For good? I can tell you how it might be possible if you take off Red's gag. Opal obeyed.
and as soon as she did, Red let out a slew of curses that I didn't think appropriate for infant ears. The baby didn't either, because he started crying, and the miller began to stir in his sleep. Quickly, Opal picked up Archie and rocked him and soothed him, which soothed the sleeping miller as well. I had to admit, seeing Opal cuddle and whisper to her baby was very sweet. It made my heart pinch and swell all at once. I really didn't want to take her baby.
"Rump, you idiot," said Red in a harsh whisper. "Why did you come back?"
"I didn't want to," I said, still spinning the straw.
"Frederick and Bruno found me and kidnapped me, and I almost got away until a gnome found me and announced the birth of Opal's baby, and then I had to come. Did you know that magic can force you to do something you don't want to?"
"Magic will make you do anything you've bound yourself to," said Red.
"Why do you think witches don't like to get involved in anything? You're in a tangle, Rump."
"Since birth."
"Well, what about you? Unless I spin this gold, you're going to die."
"And what do you think they'll do with you? Make you Lord of the Pixies? Oh, please, Rump, you're the one who's going to die if you don't stop."
"I can't, Red. I can't."
In a whisper, I quickly told her what I had learned about my aunts and my mother and my name. Her eyes widened as I spoke, and when I finished the story, all she managed to say was, "Oh." The things I'd said hung in the air for a heavy moment.
"This is my destiny, Red. I don't have any choice."
"That's not true, Rump. You do have a choice."
I started to feel irritated.
"I don't have a choice, Red, unless I choose to let the miller hurt you, maybe even kill you, or kill me. Do you want me to make that choice?"
"No, Rump, that's not what I want."
The miller snorted and sat up abruptly, looking dazed and confused.
What are you?"
Red whispered frantically to me.
"Your name, Rump. There has to be more than that. Your mother wouldn't have done that to you."
"You think you know so much? There isn't more. My destiny is this."
The miller came to his senses. He grabbed a handful of Red's hair, and she growled and struggled against him.
"Rump, this isn't your destiny. You're not—"
But then the miller fastened the gag over her mouth again and threw her against a pile of straw so forcefully that a heap fell over her head and buried her up to her chest. Oswald glowered at her, and she glowered back. Then he walked slowly over to me. I concentrated on spinning, hunched low as I fed the straw into the wheel. Whir, 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 another spool. A little pile had formed at my feet. The miller's massive shadow fell over me. He bent down close, and I could smell his breath. It smelled like rotting meat and sour ale, worse than a troll's breath.
"Do something like that again, and I'll put your little friend in a haystack and set it on fire."
His hand came down across my face and knocked me back from the wheel. Straw flew everywhere like thick golden rain.
"Get up! You will not stop until every last bit of straw is gold."
He turned to Opal, who was clutching her baby, protecting him from her father's fury.
"You, put that thing back in the basket. It doesn't belong to you."
Opal obeyed, and I obeyed. I spun in silence for many hours. The afternoon sun burned through the window, making the spools of gold glow red. I had a good high stack, but I didn't think I had put a dent in all the straw. I would have to spin through the night if I was to finish in 3 days, and one of the days was nearly gone. I was already exhausted. When the sun was low in the sky, Frederick and Bruno took me outside so that I could relieve myself of nature's call. They stood right by me, their hands on the big knives at their waists, reminding me that I was trapped. At least the cold air revived me a little, and I could think more clearly. I forced my brain not to think about my destiny or myself. I thought only of getting Red out of this mess. Whatever problems I had, she didn't deserve to be tangled up in them. I would get her free, and then I'd deal with everything else. Back in the castle, the miller tied me to the wheel again and stood over me as I spun. Whenever I filled the bobbin, he quickly removed the skein and added it to the growing pile of gold. Opal had scooted as near to Archie as she dared, looking back and forth between her father and me. She drew her legs up to her chest and wrapped her arms tightly around her shins and rocked back and forth in rhythm to my spinning. She rocked so vigorously that the floorboards beneath her began to creak.
By nightfall, the boards lifted each time she rocked back, and then cracked down as she came forward. Creak, snap, creak, snap. Red stared at me as I spun, a look of hard determination on her face. I shrugged helplessly, and she rolled her eyes and sank back into the straw. I didn't dare talk, my face still burned with the miller's hand. But questions tumbled around in my head, 1,000 little birds pecking at my brains. Red said I hadn't found all of my name, but how did that help me? Even if it was true, I was no closer to finding out the rest, and besides, Rumple made sense. Trapped, trapped, trapped. Eventually, the miller fell asleep in a pile of straw again, and the moment he did, Opal crept over to me with a desperate look in her eyes. "You said you would tell me how I could keep my baby. Tell me now." I stared at her. I had nearly forgotten our agreement, but Opal had been waiting all this time for the miller to fall asleep so that she could ask. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her face was wet with tears. Her chin trembled, and before I could say anything, she started crying again. "Stop, stop, Opal. I mean, Your Majesty, there is a way that you can keep your baby. Stop crying." She stopped crying, and I sighed with relief. "Tell me," said Opal as she wiped her nose on her sleeve. I racked my brain wildly. I looked at Red, but she just shook her head at me. We both knew there was no way, but I had to tell Opal something, anything. I had to give her an impossible task. "You must tell me my name," I said. That makes me think about the traditional fairy tale, because that's exactly what the little man says to the miller's daughter in that story. "Your name?" she asked. "Yes, my true name, all of it. If you guess my name before I'm done spinning this gold, you can keep your baby." "But your name is Robert," she said. "Or no, it's Butt. Frederick and Bruno always called you Butt." "My name has never been Robert or Butt," I said impatiently. "You have to guess my real name." "And if I do, you'll give me back Archie?" I nodded. I knew I was secure in this bargain. She would never guess my name. I didn't even have a real name, only a curse. "I promise," I said. Opal took a deep, shuddering breath. "I can speak to the king's wise men and search all the name books." Whatever kept her busy and wail-free, I thought. She went off looking more lighter, but my burden was still heavy, and my legs and back already ached. I was in a sea of gold now, a filthy golden ocean. Later, Opal strolled into the room with a list of names written on a long scroll. "Is your name Gaspar, or Melchior, or Balthazar? Those are very rare names. Is it one of those?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Rump," I said. "My name has always started with Rump." "But that can't be your real name." "It's only part of my name." She looked confused and stared down at her parchment. "Is it Nebuchadnezzar?" I stopped my spinning and stared at her. Was she serious? My sympathy for Opal was fading with the thickening of her skull. "That is not my name." "Oh," was all she said, and she turned away, sighing at all the work she had wasted. Opal stared blankly at the parchment a bit longer, then stretched out and fell asleep in the straw, her arms reaching toward her sleeping baby. As soon as Opal fell asleep, the miller snorted awake, rubbed his eyes, and grinned at all the gold. He took a large sack and began filling it with gold. "That's good," he said, looking at the gold, "not me. Plenty for all." He stuffed the sack to the brim and then staggered out of the room with the bulging sack flung over his shoulder. The first day was gone, and though the pile of gold grew above my head, the straw still loomed like a mountain. A few pixies crawled through the cracks in the floorboards. All the gold and magic must have awakened them from their winter sleep. They danced and chirped around me and the spinning wheel for a minute, and then nestled in the coils of gold and fell asleep. The buzzards, how I longed to join them. That's the end of chapter 28. Now we've been reading for about 45 minutes. You can go ahead and take another break if you want. And when you come back, we'll read chapter 29, which is called Guessing Games for Finding Names. "Sheepshanks, Crookshanks, Spindleshanks." I allowed Opal to rattle off any ridiculous name she wanted. The fact that my name actually began with Rump still hadn't gotten through to her. Either way, it would all come to nothing, but at least it kept her from crying. Gibbly Shanks! Woolly Shanks! Pepper Shanks! The door opened and the miller entered. Opal crumpled up her list of silly names and jumped away from me, but the miller took no notice of her. He went right to the gold and started to refill his sack.
I think we will exceed the king's expectations, even if we do not give him all the gold.
He laughed wickedly as he stuffed the sack with gold.
Yes, he'll never notice the difference.
Opal glared at her father. What makes you think you can keep any of it? I could tell him, you know. I am the queen. The miller smiled.
You could tell him just as easily as I could tell him. It was not you who spun the gold. How do you think the king would take that?
Opal clamped her mouth shut and looked away. The miller cast his gaze on me, and I quickened my foot on the treadle. Then he left. As soon as the door had snapped shut, Opal spouted off another trio of names. Bindershanks, Spindershanks, Thistleshanks. She went through 100 Shanks names and continued to speak to servants and messengers through the crack of the door as they handed her new lists. Some of the names made me glad I was called Rump. Who would want to name their child Peabody? I'd rather be a Rump than a Peabody. Opal kept busy with the names unless the miller was present, and when Archie needed feeding, she seemed quite peeved to have to stop. She had become so obsessed with finding my name, she forgot why she was looking for it in the first place. In the meantime, the miller was piling the gold in little stacks and counting them. Frederick and Bruno helped him, but the miller slapped their hands if they lingered on the skeins of gold too long. Sometimes they'd watch me spin with a kind of awe, and I almost thought they were admiring me, but their eyes were only on the gold. Red tried to communicate with me at first, making faces and shaking her head this way and that way, but after a while she gave up and sank into herself, just staring into the fire and sleeping in small stretches. Oswald gave Red and me stale bread and moldy cheese to eat, but Red didn't eat any, and I worried. I stuffed the food in my mouth and spun faster. Even if I was vile, I needed the energy to finish my task. Opal continued guessing names for me. Adderbrecht, Herbertrick, Zettelmeager. That is not my name, I said, and continued to spin. The whir of the wheel. I heard rumple, 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 trapped, trapped, trapped. Ferdinand, Ferdinando, Edigenhard. That is not my name. Opal began to despair, and my guilt deepened. I had given her false hope. Maybe I had given myself false hope, as if there really could be more to me than just a tangled mess. Whir, whir, rumple, 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 trapped, trapped, trapped. As the second day drew to a close, Opal rocked back and forth on the floor again, and the boards creaked and snapped. Creak, snap, creak, snap. Whir, whir, whir. A few times I actually saw people through the cracks in the floorboards, moving around in the room below. I heard the sound of chatter and recognized a familiar voice. It was Martha, the cook who had helped me when I fell out of the tower. It was sort of funny that I was right above her now. I strained my ears to catch any good gossip she might have, but I couldn't hear well enough to make sense of it. The gold was now stacked higher than the straw, far above my head, but heaps and heaps of straw still remained. I couldn't see the end of it, and once I finished, I knew the miller would find new ways to manipulate me. There had to be a way out. Red had said there was a way. Her granny had said so too. There was something I was missing. I just knew it, but I couldn't see what. I couldn't think in this small space filled with straw and gold. I needed air. And I needed rest. I closed my eyes and put my head down on the wheel. I would only rest for a minute. Creak, snap. Creak, snap. My head jerked up at the sound. Opal was rocking back and forth again, lifting the floorboards and snapping it back down. I looked around, dazed. Gold and straw were everywhere, and out the window I could see it was dark. I had fallen asleep. The second day was gone. How late was it? I lifted my arms to stretch.
I hadn't moved all day from the spinning wheel, not even to answer the calls of nature. Nature was screaming at me now, and so was my brain. I had the strange feeling that I'd just awoken from a dream, but I couldn't remember what it was. I was thinking of destiny and names, the Witch of the Woods and Stiltskins, my aunts and the Rumples, the trolls and their magical horde, the apple tree and my mother. There were ideas flying inside my head, answers, but they couldn't get out in this room. My brain needed open space. I have to go outside, I announced. Nature calls.
Can't it wait?
Said Oswald.
I've been holding it in for a long time. I might have an accident and get it all over the straw, and I'm not sure I can make gold out of pea straw.
The miller's eyes flashed, but he waved me away.
Frederick, Bruno, take our friend outside. Make sure he's well protected.
The brothers sat up and smiled malevolently. They had done very little the past 2 days besides watch me spin gold or run mindless errands for the miller. They were restless and bored, and that was a dangerous state for Frederick and Bruno.
Yes, said Frederick, it will be our pleasure. And take the baby with you, said the miller. I would hate for him to get lonely.
He laughed heartily, and Opal whimpered. I gritted my teeth. This was not helpful. Bruno untied me, and I hoisted the baby's basket in my arms. When we were outside, Frederick and Bruno hovered next to me as I relieved myself by a tree.
I don't need your help.
It's for your safety. We wouldn't want you to get eaten by trolls, said Frederick.
Trolls, a little egg cracked in my brain. I knew some trolls. Trolls that could smell magic and hoarded it and guarded a poison apple tree. A stiltskin.
No, that would be awful,
I said. The egg cracked all the way open, and suddenly my idea emerged. It was a little crazy and dangerous, perhaps, but I had to do something.
You know,
I said, considering my words carefully,
there are other things out there besides trolls. Just beyond the gates, a little ways in the eastern woods, I've actually hidden a stash of gold.
Gold? Bruno licked his lips as if I'd just said lamb chops.
Gold, I said. I can't carry it all on my own, but if you help me, I'll split it with you.
Their eyes glittered. Bruno nodded, but Frederick pulled him back.
How do we know you're not tricking us just so you can run away?
I pointed to the castle.
Red's still in there. I wouldn't run away. And besides, it's dangerous in those woods. There might be wolves or witches or trolls out there. I just thought I might have a better chance if you were with me, because you're soldiers now. I could wait until I'm done with your father, but then he might find out about it and want the gold for himself.
Frederick whispered something in Bruno's ear, and a greedy grin spread across his face.
We'll help you,
they said at the same time.
But we get most of it, said Frederick. There's 2 of us and 1 of you, and what do you need with gold?
I don't need much, I said. Frederick pushed me to start moving.
Then you'll get as much as you're worth, but...
That's the end of chapter 29. And chapter 30 is the last chapter I'll be reading on this video. It's quite a long chapter, so you probably will want to pause again before you come back to finish it. Chapter 30 is called The Stiltskin. Because Frederick and Bruno were soldiers and something like nobility, they were able to get a carriage with horses from the stables.
Better if we're quick, said Frederick. I'll send a message to Father and tell him you're having a hard time.
Bruno snorted. Frederick found a gnome and gave him the message, and then we left. When I had nothing with me, the journey to the troll's forest had taken half a day, he was so slow. But with the carriage, we were there within half an hour. Bruno whipped the horses so they went faster, and we bounced along the road. Archie woke with the whips and the roar of the carriage and started to wail. I tried to rock him and shush him, but he was awkward in my arms, and he only cried louder.
Where is this place?
Bruno yelled over the baby's wails.
You said it was just beyond the gates.
Bruno looked through the trees as if a wolf might jump out from them at any moment.
Slow down, just a bit farther.
We came to the bend in the road that I recognized.
Stop,
I told him, and Archie quieted as the carriage became still. We stepped down, and I walked off the road.
Through here,
I said, pointing into the blackness of the trees. Frederick and Bruno halted at the edge of the road.
In there?
they asked at the same time. Frederick's voice cracked. I had to hide the gold in a place where no one else would find it, I said, and I walked into the trees. A few moments later, I heard their footsteps behind me. We walked slowly and quietly until we came to the apple tree. Its branches bowed, heavy with the weight of poisoned fruit. I really hoped Bork was still trying to catch a pet, even though he already had nothing. Gently, I set the baby down on the ground. Wait here, I told them, and approached the tree. There was very little light to see by, but I searched around the tree until I saw it, the snare. Very carefully, I placed my foot into the trap. Snap, swip, slunk! The rope yanked me off the ground, and I screamed louder than necessary to attract the trolls. Frederick's and Bruno's jaws dropped. A few moments later, rustling came from the brush behind me, and the first of the trolls appeared, ugly and smelly as ever. Trolls! I shouted. Help! Trolls! Trolls! Help me! Frederick and Bruno squealed and ran, flailing their arms. They didn't even pause to pick up their baby nephew. They just bolted through the trees toward the carriage. I barely heard the crack of the whip or the horse's hooves above their screams. In a few moments, the noise faded.
What's this? Said one of the trolls. Didn't you learn anything from last time?
Hello, Bork. Archie began crying.
And you brought extra? Said Bork. Well, we can always use a side dish.
Oh, you don't want that, I said. Far too bitter. Do you have any sludge?
We always have sludge.
And he cut me down. The first part of the plan had worked. I was out of the castle, and Frederick and Bruno were gone. But that was the easy part. Now I had to find a stiltskin before it was too late. Something told me I was in the right place. I was greeted with many snorts and snarls from the trolls. Slop now had a wolf pelt on his head instead of his deer antlers. How did you get that? I asked.
He ate the apples,
said Slop.
Wolves don't eat apples, Bork corrected. He died of starvation, didn't even have any meat on his bones. Because them apples ate it all up from their poison.
Slop pushed down the wolf head so its teeth were hanging over his eyes. Then he sniffed me.
You so reek of magic.
I wanted to tell him he reeked of troll, but I didn't. Mard hugged me when she saw me, which was comforting despite the smell. What is this? She said, pointing to Archie in the basket. That's Archie, I said without explanation. He's horribly clean, and so are you. Mard took Archie from my arms, and Gorp and Grot tackled me to the ground and smeared mud in my clothes. As I stood up, a fat donkey came trotting toward me. Nothing, I cried out. He brayed and pushed me with his head right back down in the mud.
We named him Horace, said Grot. He likes to eat worms.
I laughed. Nothing's name is Horace, and he likes to eat worms? Well, he looked happy. Maybe having a real name made him a better donkey. Mard pushed a cup of sludge into my hands. You need fattening, she said. You grew. Then she dipped her fingers in the sludge and fed some to Archie. I thought for sure he would start crying, but he didn't. He slurped and gurgled. The young prince had a taste for worms, I guess. This will make him a strong boy, said Mard.
Why have you come back? Asked Bork. And who are those boys?
Those were the queen's brothers, I explained.
Can they make gold from straw too?
Bork asked.
They didn't look too smart.
They can't make gold, neither can the queen.
I took a deep breath. It's me. I make the gold. All the slurping and grunting and snorting stopped, and the trolls stared at me. So I told them my story, all of it. The spinning, my mother, my name, and how I had come to gain Archie.
No wonder you reek of magic, said Slop. You were born in this stuff. Why can't you give him back if you don't want him? Slop asked.
Because she promised him in exchange for the gold, so I have to take him. It's part of the magic.
Why would she promise her baby? Asked Gorp.
I don't know. Humans do a lot of stupid things that make no sense. The trolls grunted in agreement and raised their cups. Archie started to cry again, and Mard bounced and rocked him. Too clean, poor thing. She took handfuls of mud and slathered it on his face so he looked like a piglet in a mud puddle. I thought for sure he'd go into hysterics, but instead he stopped crying and drifted off in Mard's arms as she rocked him. Watching this, I felt a pang in my chest. A baby should have a mother, and a mother should have her baby.
That is, if destiny works out the way it's supposed to. I needed to find a way to give Archie back to Opal. That's why I had come here.
I have something to show you, said Bork.
What is it?
Something I discovered a little while ago. Let's go to the tree.
We took a torch through the trees until we came to the clearing with the apple tree, standing so still and perfect in the dark. Bork reached up and picked an apple and held it to the light of his torch.
This tree grew from the seed of a poisoned apple, you know, so I've never tried one, but a few weeks ago I saw a strange thing. A family of raccoons came out in the middle of the night and started eating those apples. I watched them, followed them to their den, and they didn't die. They didn't even seem sick, so I thought maybe those apples are poisonous for raccoons, but I kept watching the tree, and a week later I saw some squirrels gnawing at the apples, and they didn't get sick either. So you know what else I thought? Maybe those apples aren't really poisonous at all. Maybe poison doesn't have to grow from poison. Not always. This tree, I think, just maybe it grew the way it wanted to grow. Those seeds, they were stronger than the magic.
Without warning, Bork took a bite of the apple. I snatched it and threw it away. What are you doing? He chewed and swallowed, and we waited. My heart pounded as I thought that any moment Bork was going to drop dead. He smacked his lips and grimaced. Surely the poison was sinking in now.
Not as good as sludge, he said. Well, I just thought that might be useful to you. You can think about it.
Think about what? I asked.
The things you know that you don't know you know. You're not so bright compared to a troll, but you're a crumb smarter than most humans.
Thank you, I said, but I'm not sure I understand.
You humans always talk about magic and destiny like it's the most powerful thing in the world, like it controls you.
Doesn't it?
I guess it does if you want it to. Maybe it does other humans, but you, Rump? You were born with magic. I can smell it stronger on you than on any magical object I've ever found, even stronger than this tree.
But that's the problem, I said. It's the magic that's caused all this trouble. Just like all those things in your hoard caused trouble. I can't do anything about it.
It's the people who cause the trouble, Rump, not the magic itself. If you're so full of magic, why should you be helpless?
I don't know, I said. I felt dizzy with confusion. Bork handed me the torch.
Think about it. It's not so hard.
He walked back into the trees. Everything was cold and quiet now, except for the crackle of the torch. I stared at the apple tree. I still couldn't believe Bork ate one. Maybe that poison didn't work on trolls. Maybe it only worked on princesses. Or maybe Bork was right. Maybe those seeds really were stronger than the magic. I am not a tree. I was born with a name, and that name is my destiny. Rumple was my wrapped and trapped name. It controls me. My destiny controls me. But then a new question entered my mind. What is destiny? I knew that everyone had one, just as they had a name, and they were one and the same. Just as no person chooses their own name, no person chooses their own destiny. It isn't up to them. But what if that wasn't so? If Red's granny said that I must find my destiny, doesn't that mean I have some say in where to look? Maybe destiny isn't something that just happens. Maybe destiny is something you do. Maybe destiny is like a seed and it grows. Maybe I wasn't powerless. Even with my name, even with all the snares and tangles, I could do things like spin straw into gold and make terrible mistakes that ended up with the girls being carried to their doom and promising me their firstborn child. That was all part of my destiny. My name is Rumple. My name means I am bound, but I can grow more powerful than those bindings. I am more than the name I have always known. Deep inside, I have a power that no one can take away from me, a deep magic more powerful than any magic placed upon me, a magic that I was born with, that grew inside me, deep in my bones, a stiltskin. I am Rumple. I am a stiltskin. Rumple, stiltskin. I pictured my mother holding me in her arms, dying, ready to give me a name that would overpower all the magic that had trapped her. She whispered it to me. It was a name that would make me everything I am. No one else had ever heard it but me. My name is my destiny. My name is my power. Rumple, Stiltkin. I heard Mother's whisper reaching across years and mountains and valleys. Rumple, Stiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin. The name, my name, shook in my chest. It traveled through my brain and down my arms and fingertips to my legs and toes. The sound of it echoed so loud inside of me, I felt I would burst. I made a rhyme then and there, a rhyme full of powerful words to release into the black night. Tomorrow I'm free, today I'm alive. The curses and tangles no longer survive. From deep within the wisdom came that Rumpelstiltskin is my name. I was a Stiltskin, and that power was greater than the Rumple. I felt it now, all inside of me, as if just saying my name out loud had unleashed a force, and it was wrapping around the tangles, ready to rip them apart. I picked an apple from the tree and took a bite, sweet juice filling my mouth. I am more powerful than a tree, I shouted into the night air, and I laughed and danced. A flickering shadow caught my eye, and I froze mid-laugh. Frederick stepped from behind a tree into the clearing, his arms trembling as he held up a bow and arrow. "Don't move," he said. "Come out, Bruno." He kicked at his brother, who squealed and slid out from behind another tree, holding a spear tight to his chest. He was white as the moon and shaking so hard it was as if some outside force were throttling him.
"Don't move," Frederick said again, pointing his bow and arrow at me. "You have to come back with us. You still have to spin all that gold, or your friend is going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt."
Frederick took a step forward. Bruno took a step back and whimpered, mumbling, "Trolls, filthy trolls, cursed trolls." I dropped my apple. I wasn't afraid of Frederick or Bruno anymore. They looked pathetic and small, quivering with their weapons. I was amazed that I had ever been afraid of them, had ever allowed them to bully me. But I also realized I wasn't free yet. I had found my name. I still felt it inside me. The magic of my stiltskin was still rushing through my arms and legs and my brain, making me big and powerful. But the Rumple had yet to be untangled. Red was still trapped in the castle. There was still the miller to face. I still had Archie with me, and no one could untangle that all but me. That's the end. When we come back next week, the last week of school, we'll read chapter 31, Third Day's the Charm. Thank you so much for joining me for this kickstand read aloud. I'm excited that you will be prepared to finish the book with me on the start of next week.